Last week we looked at Zacchaeus, and Jesus met Zacchaeus, and we looked at what happened when Jesus met Zacchaeus. See, Jesus wanted to call him by name, and we looked at the power of a name and how Jesus knows us by name. He will call us by name. Even though Zacchaeus was hiding in the midst of the crowd, somewhere in a tree, Jesus knew him, called him by name. Jesus wanted to get personal with him. He didn't just say, "Hey Zacchaeus, I see you up there. God bless you, man," and walk past. He called him down. He said, "Come down. I'm coming to your house. I'm coming to your house." In fact, he uses the word, "I must come to your house." Remember that word "must." It's going to come up again this evening. I must come to your house, Zacchaeus. Jesus must get personal with you. He wants to. That's his desire. He doesn't want to be a faraway God and a distant Savior. His desire is to get personal with us, to call us by name and to get personal with us. And when he does that, when he enters, when you, like Zacchaeus, when you joyfully welcome him into the house, then you will see that Jesus wants to change your heart. Zacchaeus was a selfish man. He lived for himself at the cost of everybody else. And Jesus meets him, comes to his house, calls him by name, gets in there, talks to Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus becomes a selfless man. He gives everything away. He gives it all to the poor, and the part that he kept for himself, he says, "I'm going to use it to give back fourfold to people I have wronged. So if I took $2 from somebody that I didn't deserve, 8 I'm going to give back." And it changes his heart. You see a new Zacchaeus who's not living for himself anymore. He's trusting God. He's like, "I've met Jesus." And we asked ourselves, have I met Jesus? Have I met this Jesus that Zacchaeus met? This God who wants to be personal in my life and change my heart? Or is Jesus far away and on a throne when it comes to my life? This evening, we're going to look at another person who met Jesus. Another person who met Jesus. There's a difference though in this meeting. See, in the first meeting, Zacchaeus did a lot to meet Jesus, right? He didn't know he was going to meet Jesus, but he did a lot to get a peek at Jesus. He just wanted to watch Jesus as he walked by. He wanted to see who this man is and what all the fuss was about. So Zacchaeus, being short, climbs into a tree to look over the crowd and see Jesus. He does a lot of effort. He does a lot of things to get a peek at Jesus. This evening, we're going to look at somebody who didn't do anything. They were just about their normal life. But Jesus meets them. And it's found in John chapter 4. For the more perceptive Bible students, you already know who I'm talking about. It's the woman from Samaria. Jesus, in John chapter 4, goes to meet this woman. And it's a long passage, and I spared Grace the mundane task of clicking through 42 verses. Okay, because it's a long passage. The whole story is a long passage. 42 verses. But let me tell you the story. And it's in John chapter 4 verses 1 to 42. So you know I'm not lying. Okay. I'll add drama to it as we go along, but nothing that is away from scripture. So Jesus and his disciples are going. They've heard that they've become more famous than John the Baptist. And for some reason Jesus tells his disciples, "Hey, let's go. Let's move. We're going to go from Judea to Galilee." I'm not just simply doing random hand actions. Remember that. Judea to Galilee. We're going to go up there. We're going to go to Galilee and do some ministry over there. And so they get together and they start going. And as you go down, it says in verse 4, and he had to pass through Samaria. Now geographically, that's right. Keep it in the back of your head. There's Judea, there's Galilee, and in the middle there's Samaria. Okay? It is there. And he's going to go. And he goes with the disciples. They cross through Samaria. As they go through there, he's tired. Jesus gets tired. And he tells the disciples, "Hey, go look for food. Why don't you get us some food?" So the disciples are off. They're looking for food in the midst of this place called Samaria. And it's important. Keep all these details in mind. Jesus is tired. He's waiting for the disciples to bring back food. He goes and sits near a well. He sits near a well, and a woman comes walking towards a well with a jar to draw water. And as she comes close, Jesus says, "Give me a drink. Give me a drink. Wouldn't you give me a drink?" And she's surprised, and she looks at him and says, "Why would you ask me for a drink? You're a Jew." So it was obvious that he was a Jew. Maybe they dressed differently or they had a different beard. I have no idea. But she looks at him and she says, "You're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan. Why would you ask me for a drink?" And I'm going to get into the history of that in just a bit. I'm just telling you the story for the benefit of those who don't know the story. But she says, why would you ask me for a drink? And Jesus says, if you knew who was asking you, if you knew God and you knew who was asking you, you would ask me for a drink. You would ask me for a drink of living water. Living water? What is living water? She's like, what? She doesn't even get to the living water part. That itself is, it's going to confuse her. She doesn't even go as far as living water. She just looks at him and says, you don't have anything to draw anything with. I have a jar. You have nothing. Where are you going to get this living water? And then she goes into history and she kind of links the Samaritans to the Jews. She says, are you greater than our father Jacob who gave us this well? See, this was the well that Jacob had built. You go back all the way to the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, and you'll find mention of this well. She said, are you greater than Jacob who gave us this well? And Jesus says, again, he says, if everyone who drinks this water, he gets back to the living water. He says, everybody who drinks this water, there down at the bottom of this well, the water that you're trying to draw, everyone who drinks this gets thirsty again. But the water that I give, people who drink of the water I give, they will never, ever be thirsty. It will become a spring of water within them. It will become a spring of water within them. And she says immediately, like, this is fascinating stuff. Sir, give me a drink of that water. Whatever you're talking about, I want it. I want a drink of that water. And Jesus doesn't give it to her. He says, go call your husband and come. It's like, let's give both of you kind of a deal. Go call him and come. She says, I don't have a husband. I don't have a husband. He says, you're right. You're right. You don't have a husband. And then in verse 16, he says, in verse 17, sorry, he says, you're right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands. And the one you are with now is not even your husband. You've had 5 husbands. And you're living with somebody now. You're living in with someone. So you're right in what you said. I don't know about her. Me? In that situation, I would have gone pale. I would have lost all color. I would have been shaking. I would have been like, how the heck did he know that? She's sitting there. Her mind is blown. And she says, I perceive that you are a prophet. See, how did you know that? How did you know that? What, you're talking about living water. You're talking about, a spring of eternal living water. You suddenly know my past. You're going to be able to draw water without anything. I perceive that you're a prophet. Perceptive woman. And so she gives him a theological question. She says, our fathers worship on this mountain. And she obviously points to some mountain nearby. But you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. So you're a Jew and you say Jerusalem is where we have to worship. But our fathers worship here. Where is the place we ought to worship? Where should we go? You're saying there, we say here. Where is the correct place to worship? And Jesus answers. He says, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. Jesus blows our mind with His answer. Blows our mind. And then she looks at him and she says, I know about this Messiah. There's a Messiah that's supposed to come. We've heard about it. I know you Jews have heard about it, but we've also heard about this Messiah who's going to come and who's going to set everything right. And Jesus looks at her and in a mind-blowing statement, He says, that's me. I who speak to you am the Messiah. And then we'll pick it up later on what happens later as we go on with the sermon. But it's another beautiful meeting where Jesus meets this woman from Samaria. No name given. Zacchaeus at least had a name because Jesus called him by that name. So, we knew the name. Here there's no name. We only know her as a Samaritan woman. And we want to pick up 3 amazing truths about this Jesus. And you want to ask yourself that same question. Have I met this Jesus? The first thing you want to see is that Jesus will go out of His way to meet her. Now, if you've been following, you're like, Hang on. You told me it was on the way. Remember, at the start I told you, Judea, Galilee, and Samaria. So it's geographically, on the way. But hang on, it doesn't only tell you Samaria. Okay, it says he departed again for Galilee. He had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar or Sychar. Sychar for this evening. He comes to that town. If you look at the geography of it, Judea, Galilee, Samaria, Sychar is somewhere there in Samaria. It's not on the way. It's not on the way geographically. So geographically, Jesus did not have to go to this place. He could have just gone straight on. And let me tell you the history, and this is where it all comes in. I told you the history will be important. The history of this. See, the Samaritans were looked at as a half-breed. People who married out of the faith. People who had lost their birthright. People who had given up on God and had gone their own way. They were looked at as sinners. People who had the truth, who had the law, but chose to do something else. And so they were worse than the people who didn't have the law. And the Jews hated the Samaritans. They were unclean. For a Jewish person, in their mind, a Samaritan would be, for us, to put a modern day language to it, they would be like a Dalit person in our communities. Untouchables. Untouchables. Stay far. In fact, for a Jewish person, this is how unclean Samaria was. For a Jew going from Judea to Galilee, they would cross the river Jordan. They would go to the east first, and they would travel up north and then cross back over the river Jordan to get to Galilee. But they would avoid Samaria. And even if you dared to go through Samaria, you would take the straightest, shortest possible route, not stopping to talk to anybody. You would just make sure you get out of there as quick as possible. I remember driving to Bhiwadi for a young adults camp. And there's these little dark sectors in the middle. You know, when it's fine and nice and Gurgaon lights, you're looking around, watching all the lights, beautiful, lovely drive, amazing, music blaring. Once it comes to the scary part, you're not stopping, you're not staring, you're trying to get past that as quick as possible to the next civilized part of the highway. You're not sightseeing in those moments. You fear for your life. You're going fast through those times. That's what a Jew would do through Samaria. Samaria was the place you wanted to spend as less possible time. And so Jesus didn't have to go there geographically to this town. Jesus was in fact obligated to not go there socio-religiously. If you went from the social religious kind of a framework, Jesus should not have gone there. Nobody would have found fault with him. But look at the power of this one word. Jesus tells Zacchaeus, I must come to your house. Here scripture tells us, and he had to pass there. In fact, if you look at other translations, it said he must go there. He knew he must go there. There was a compulsion on him to go there. It was not by geography, it was not by religion, it was not by anything else except his sheer desire to meet this appointment that he had with a woman by the well. Jesus is the kind of God who will go out of his way for reconciliation. He will go out of his way for reconciliation. And this is not the only time he did it. See, you can think that, but then Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus went out of his way to see Jesus. And the rich young ruler, he went out of his way to see Jesus. And the man who met Jesus by night, he went out of his way to see Jesus. The beggars and the people who wanted healing, they went out of their way to see Jesus. So this is the only time he did it. No, let me tell you that this is the nature of Jesus. You see, from heaven's throne to glory, earth was out of the way. It was not on the way to go from the throne of heaven to being eternally glorified. Jesus could have just peeked through the clouds without ever coming to earth, and every knee would bow down and worship him because they would know he is God. Between heaven's throne and eternal glory, earth was not on the way. Geographically, it was out of the way. Every religious leader, if they were in heaven talking to Jesus, giving him advice, it was out of the way. Why would a clean, holy God associate and take on unclean flesh and die the death of the worst criminal possible? It was out of the way, but Jesus is the kind of God who will go out of his way for the sake of reconciliation. Read Philippians chapter 2 verses 5 onwards. Not right now, read it later. It tells you that he didn't hang on to the glory of heaven, but he let it go and took on the nature of a servant, becoming obedient to even death on a cross. Jesus went out of the way. He's already done it for you in your life. Don't wait around wondering when Jesus is going to go out of the way for you. When is he going to bless you in some way that he doesn't have to, but he's gone out of the way to bless you. He's already done that. He's already gone so far out of the way for you to reconcile you with the Father. And there's two types of people sitting here. The ones who are going to say, have I met Jesus? No. And the ones who say, have I met Jesus? Yes. And if you're saying no, and you're still dilly-dallying, and you're still standing far away from Jesus, you're still waiting for something to happen, then this evening I beg you to look at Jesus and to see a God who will go out of his way for you. He didn't have to, but he went out of his way for you. And if you're sitting here this evening and you're saying, yes, I've met Jesus, then I want to ask you a question. Has that meeting with Jesus changed your life to the point that you go out of your way for reconciliation? I remember years back when I got into a disagreement with somebody very close to me. And we didn't see eye to eye for a while. We just were like, I can't talk to you right now. And we took a break from each other. We were really closely working together on a lot of things. And I was like, for a while, let's just, you in your world, me in mine. And then God convicted us, both of us, I think me more heavily, that we need to, this is not Christian. We got to get back. We got to be reconciled. And so we set up a meeting. Let's meet and talk this through. But then the day was so hot. And that was summer, and the few days were very hot. And then the weekend came, and there was youth fellowship, and there was church, and there was worship, and I got busy. And so it didn't happen. For a couple of weeks, we never met. There were excuses that came in the way of reconciliation because neither of us went out of our way. My brother, my sister, if you're sitting here and saying you have met this Jesus who goes out of his way to reconcile, did it change your life? Who in your life needs to be reconciled with you, but you have not gone out of your way? You have not done everything possible to make it happen. See, God did that for you. For you, God has done that. You met Jesus only by the grace of God because he left heaven's throne and came down out of his way to reconcile you. Will you not afford that grace to someone else? He had to pass through Samaria because he had to go out of his way to meet this woman. Not only did he leave heaven's throne and come to earth, but when he came here and he found the religious structures not allowing him to go to Samaria, he says, forget the religious structures. I'm going because I knew I have to meet her. He sends the disciples away to get food because they might have said, no, let's go. Let's move away. He sends them away. He knew he was going to meet her. He sends them away. He meets her. He meets her far out of his way. The second thing you want to know about this Jesus, if you're going to meet him this evening, Jesus will go out of his way for reconciliation. Jesus has everything you need and has it in abundance. Have you met this Jesus? He has everything you need. She comes to the well looking for water. He says, I've got it, and I've got water that will spring up within you so that you will never be thirsty again. I've got everything you want, and I've got it in abundance. You come looking for water. See, he takes a carnal, earthly conversation and he takes a spiritual swing, a spiritual dimension to it. He's not talking about if you drink the water I give, you're not going to feel thirsty. Please don't be as silly as the disciples will be in a bit and see only with earthly eyes. I used to play football here with CDC before, the football team, until they told me never to play again. You play football like me, you run around, You can have tons more stamina than me. I don't have a lot, so it's very easy to have more stamina than me. But I don't care whether you've got lots of stamina or little stamina. I don't care if you're, the Brazilian football team, the German football team, the Germans might win the World Cup, the Argentinians will win the World Cup. But when whoever wins or loses, at the end of the match, you will see one thing for sure. Amidst all the tears, amidst all the happiness, whoever wins, whoever loses, they will have bottles of water and they'll be drinking. The Brazilian team, for all their kneeling down and praising God, whether they won or lost, at the end of it drank water. See, God is not talking about if you believe in me, you're not going to be thirsty for this. He's telling her, in me, you will be satisfied. In me, you will be satisfied. She comes there, and his deep spiritual lesson to her is this. In me, you're going to be satisfied. How do you get that? Well, he brings it up later with the disciples, but it's there in the next question. You see, he links it to her desperate need for affirmation. And so 5 husbands and another man she's living with. She's not a prostitute. It doesn't call her a prostitute. These are not just sexual encounters, one-night stands she had. She had 5 husbands. She went the distance. She went down an altar and got married. They did the whole, the money spending, the whole drama of getting married. They did everything 5 times in her life. So she's not just a promiscuous woman. She's desperate for love and acceptance. And Jesus links it immediately. See, that's why he asked about the husband. He could have asked about, I'm sure she had other sins in her life. He could have asked about anything. But he links satisfaction in him with the deepest area where she's not satisfied. He says, go call your husband and come back. And immediately, she knows in her heart, she's not a satisfied woman. She knows. She knows. There's enough evidence in her life. So this evening I ask you again, have you met this Jesus? Everything you long for. No, not the Ferrari car, not the Lamborghini. Those are not safe in Delhi anymore, by the way. Not the fancy house, not the fancy job, not those things. The ones that you long for deep in your heart, late at night, on your bed, all alone, staring at the ceiling. Those deep longings within. For affirmation. For somebody who will know you completely and still love you completely. For somebody who will say, I will not leave you. For some kind of peace in the midst of a world that tries to rob you of it. For a sense of love. For a sense of worth. For a sense of identity. Apart from the business cards and everything else. Those longings, Jesus says, come to me. I have it in abundance. You will be satisfied. Are you looking for it elsewhere? Have you met this Jesus? And if your answer is yes, you've met him. But if your answer is no, then I'm saying over and over again, I invite you to meet him. Come and talk to him and say, Jesus, I've been searching, but you have it. But if your answer is yes, you have met him, then I want to ask you a question. Have you forgotten that he has everything? Over the years, have you found your identity in your business card? Have you found your affirmation and love in the arms of someone, God forbid, in the bed of somebody else? Have you found your worth in the affirmation of people who are so fickle with their praise? After giving your life to Jesus, after actually meeting him, and that day when you sang happy day, when that day was just full of joy, have you gone on and have you added, like Pastor Chandran spoke a few weeks earlier, Jesus plus something else so that you would be happy? Does Jesus alone satisfy you anymore in your life? Or are you looking for other things? Jesus tells her, me, I will satisfy. In me, you will be satisfied. Then he goes on and she asks him a question. He's so patient with her. She dodges. He says, go call your husband. She says, what about worship on the mountain? She doesn't answer the question. She doesn't go there. He's so patient with her. He follows her. This is a side little, tip on counseling. You want to counsel someone? Let them run around the place. Follow them everywhere. That's what Jesus does with her. He follows her. He lets her go around all her questions. He doesn't reprimand and say, come back to those 5 husbands. Leave that fellow you're staying with. She asks a worship question, he answers the worship question. But the third point I want to make this evening, and I want you to really understand it because it's a point that will change your life. She runs back in this story. She runs back to her town. Verse 28. The woman left her water jar. She went away into the town and said to the people, come and see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? And they went out of the town and they started coming to him. And the story goes on in verse 39. Many Samaritans from the town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did. In verse 41, many more believed because of his word. See, they had come to Jesus and they heard him speaking. And they said to the woman, it is no longer because of what you have said that we believe, for we have now heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. Have you met this Jesus? The Jesus who will go out of his way for reconciliation with you. The Jesus who has everything you need and has it in abundance. But most importantly, this evening, this Jesus who will redeem your story. The darkest parts of your story, this Jesus has the power to redeem. He won't throw it away. He didn't tell the woman, come to me. Let's talk about the strengths in your life and we'll use that to shine for the kingdom. He says, you had 5 husbands. You're living in with somebody right now. He put his finger on the thing the woman was most shameful about. And her story is a sad one. It's a sick one. The town people probably didn't like her for that. The men by now are careful around her. The ones who want a quick, get in bed with her, they know where to look for it. That's her reputation by now. This woman who's desperate for love. That's her reputation. That's her story. That's all she has to offer. That's all she takes back to the people. She doesn't say anything about the worship answer. She doesn't talk about living water. She runs back into town and says, come and see a man who told me my story. The bad part of my story. And Jesus takes that ugly story, that painful story, that dirty story of hers, and he redeems it for the sake of the kingdom of God. Nobody talked about a cross. Nobody talked about sin. Nobody talked about evangelism, salvation, nothing. She just said, he knows my story. Jesus wants to redeem your story and my story. There are some of you sitting here this evening who have dark things in your past and you don't believe Jesus will redeem you. You've met him, you will say, yes, you've met him, but you don't want to give everything to him because you're scared that he won't accept that story. My brother, my sister, not only will he accept the story, he will take that story and redeem it for the sake of his glory. See, in class 11, I flunked school and I hated it and I didn't want anyone to know about it. I was in St. Columbus, a very prestigious school. I dropped out of there. I sat at home for a whole 7 months before the 12th class board exam saying I'm not going to study. Suddenly the lights dawned that I've got to study. And I studied in a room, in an open school. My room was about as half the size of the stage and about that high. That was my classroom. From St. Columbus School to that. It was embarrassing and I didn't want to tell anybody. When I met my friends in Columbus, I didn't tell them I was studying because I'd rather they thought I was not studying than that I was in this place. I didn't want anyone to know. I was embarrassed about it. But the number of people who come to me over the years, struggling with failure in their life, God has redeemed my story. He has taken those dark, embarrassing things and he has used it for his glory. Do you believe God can redeem your story? Do you believe God can redeem any story. Any story. Even the Bin Ladens of this world, if they would come to Jesus, the power of God is so great that it would redeem even their story. Somehow, I can't see it. I bet you can't see it as well. But God's power is so great that it would even redeem their story for the sake of His glory. See, none of you have had 5 husbands or 5 wives. Some of you don't even have one. But not only has she not had 5 husbands, she was now, this is years ago, she was in a live-in relationship, which is becoming modern in India now. She was way ahead of her time. And Jesus redeemed her story. What are you holding on to in your life? Have you actually given everything to God so that He can use everything for Himself? Or have you given the good bits? The ones you're not ashamed for Jesus to use and put on display for His kingdom, and kept the other ones that you're embarrassed about back. Because He might use it and then you'll have to explain it. God will redeem you. God will redeem your story. That's the power of Jesus. And so I ask you this evening, have you met this Jesus that the woman met at the well? Have you found yourself in your life walking down to a metaphoric well where Jesus has come out of His way to meet you? Maybe that well was up at a summer camp or a winter camp. Maybe that well was a service. Maybe that well was a home group. Maybe that well was just a conversation with somebody. You walked towards it and you suddenly found Jesus had gone out of His way to meet you at that well. Have you met Him in a way that you realize that He has everything that you need? Have you stopped looking for it in other places? The money, everything else that it signifies, the fame, everything it signifies, the success at your work and everything it signifies. He doesn't want to give you only those. He wants to give you what it signifies. The heart need at the bottom. And have you met Him in a way that He's convinced you that He will redeem your story, so that you will put your story in His hand and said, Lord, maybe tomorrow, maybe 15 years from now, whenever you want to use it, God, use my story for your story, for the sake of your story, the story of your glory. Would you use my story? Not just the good parts, but the bad parts as well. The times I've messed up, the times I've failed, the times I've looked like a fool, the times I've hurt people, the times I've hurt myself, the times I've looked elsewhere other than you. God, that's my story. That's the whole thing. It's not all the good things that the people know about me. Everyone thinks that's my story. But God, this is my real story. God, would you use it? Would you redeem it for your sake and for your glory? Have you met Jesus? Have you really met this Jesus?